Aloha and welcome. Aloha Friday, everyone. My name is JoYi Reese, and I recognize many of your faces. Those of you who I'm new to, I've been speaking here um, through this phenomenal process that's been funded by the Department of Human Services, Office of Youth Services, for several of us to come in here and speak for these 1 hour sessions and or longer workshops. So some of you guys I've known through this longer workshop sessions that are very interactive. Today, it's just a presentation style. So you're just going to get information and hopefully some of you, it will serve you well. I am going to be talking about the forgiveness process and specifically the forgiveness process that Dr. Fred Luskin talks about at the Stanford Forgiveness Project. And some of you guys are going to be really familiar with that because Fred Luskin comes on a monthly basis and talks just like this during the lunch hours. So a lot of this will be familiar. Some of it is just to kind of give you an inoculation. You already know it. Some of you, this information might be brand new. So hopefully either way, you'll be able to walk away with something meaningful. So like most of you guys, I have two knees and my right knee, I was walking around the other day and just kind of mindlessly, and as a mindful forgiveness coach, I feel weird saying that, mindlessly walking around and I bump it against the side of my door and my right knee, I'm like, oh my gosh, it hurts so much more than that stimulation of actually bumping against that door. And it actually hurts more than my left knee would have because I have this really gnarly scar on my right knee. This scar didn't get here yesterday or the week before. The scar is from 2005, the year that I packed up my children, sold everything on the continental US, packed 10 boxes, and shipped all of us here to the big island of Hawaii, Hilo in particular. And it was a rough landing, you guys. It was not good. It was not good. I was frantic. I was frazzled. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I ended up having to buy a house earlier than I would have ever chosen. But here I am, bought a house. I'm really nervous, but I'm trying to keep it together because I have three little kids. The house didn't have a lot of stuff, so I had to order a bunch of things and buy, the stove and all of the things that you need in a house. And so we were outside. This is country living. So it was this gravel driveway, big, long gravel driveway. And we're waiting for this truck to come up. And I didn't know how to give directions back then because you guys know how you do directions here. You go past that big tree and you turn left on this thing. Addresses are not a thing really here, especially out in Mountain View. So I didn't know if I was giving the right direction. So we were outside and we were outside playing football on this gravel driveway. And I think I have a pretty good spiral. So I'm whipping the football and I'm catching it. My kids were enjoying ourselves. So here comes a pass, one of my sons threw, and I'm running and I go to catch it and my legs do a split, because gravel. And I get a rock that feels this big, goes straight into my kneecap. And immediately I see blood gushing all over the place. And then I look at it and okay, I'm going to be disgusting here for a second. When the white pus comes out, it's worrisome. It's white, there's blood, it's pussy. Immediately I know that this is not just a little ding, that it would probably need some stitches. But look, I'm new to the island. I'm waiting on this truck. I have three little kids. I don't have anybody else. In fact, I don't even know where the hospital is. I don't know what the process looks like. And I don't really do that kind of stuff. So it'll be fine. I'll wash it out with water and maybe I'll have a Band-Aid because back then I had kids, so I had Band-Aids around. So I tried to clean it up the best I could. And I sat there and going, oh God, I know I should take care of this, but I don't have time. I know I should take care of this, but God, where do I go? I didn't have the skill. I didn't have the information. I didn't have the desire or the willingness. For all of the reasons, I stuck a Band-Aid on it. A week goes by, a month, a year, and it's still, you guys, it's hurting. It's hurting. And even now, as I'm sitting here, I can press on my two knees and my right knee feels the impact of me not taking care of it properly. So this is not a wound that I'm feeling right now that happened right now. It's a wound from almost 17 years ago. And yet here it is. And that's what I'm talking about today. This idea of forgiveness. Usually they're about wounds from way long ago that either at the time we didn't have the skills or the support or the know-how, for all the reasons we might not have taken care of it in the way that it needed. And so sometimes somebody will say something, we'll bump up against something in our relationships, and all of a sudden we overreact. We're triggered. It hurts disproportionately to what was actually said. The same way that when I bump my knee a little bit, I'm like, oh, it hurts disproportionately to that bump. So what is that? And how do we deal with it? How do we take care of it? So welcome, you guys. Let me get this together a little. So we're talking about the forgiveness process, and very specifically the importance of being heard, those first steps. So our mission during this hour together, it'll go fast. So first we want to identify the steps to forgiveness as described by the Stand for Forgiveness Project. And in the Stand for Forgiveness Project, a lot of times you'll see 9 steps. In the way that we have used it in the Mindful Forgiveness Program, we go through 7 steps. We're going to be able to identify those, but we're going to really laser focus in on understanding the first 3 steps. The first 3 steps that I've really dubbed as the importance of being heard in a world where we're so focused on what can we do? What behaviors can we change? How can we get over it? What now? What next? I think we really do a disservice, because that's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that should have been cleaned and then stitched. So the first steps, the important steps of what does it mean to really be heard? Or if you're the supportive, what does it mean to really hear so that it felt, so that then we can go on and do the rest of the steps. We're going to review some common mistakes, barriers, and resistance to this whole idea of being heard. And then we're going to all walk away with some resources to help us practice, because knowing is not enough. A lot of us walk around, have enough facts, have enough research. In fact, you probably have a stack of books next to you that tells you all the things to do. Knowing is not enough. The magic is in the practice. So we want to get to some common language here, because I'm going to be throwing around words like trauma and healing. And the word trauma, if you're in the medical profession, is going to be used very differently than the way I'm going to use it here. So trauma, the way we're talking about it here in the context of forgiveness, is about it's a felt sense. It's about an event or a thing that happens to us that separates us from a felt sense of safety, dignity, or a sense of belonging. And that's either physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, but it is a separation. This is an event. So like a car accident, boom, you get hit. In that moment, physically, I'm separated from a sense of safety, and that might follow me for a long time. As I get into the car, I might get nervous. Yes. So that event will be trauma. For me today, I'm going to be talking about adoption. So adoption, it's that event that occurred that separated me from a sense of belonging to my family of origin. Yeah. Think about all the isms that are floating around here on this planet. That event that happens, those microaggressions or that racist comment that I might get, that separates me from a felt sense of dignity. Yeah, so I'm talking about that event, which is different than suffering, which is the ongoing carrying on of that pain. So the event that hurt my knee is the time when I fell on my gravel driveway and it pelted me. But because I didn't take care of it, or I didn't have the skills, or I didn't get the support, I didn't get the stitching, then I suffered with that ongoing pain. And the thing about suffering is that pain can be real or perceived. Perception is reality here in this case. So if we have the appropriate resources and the support, whether it's a car accident, my adoption, those racist comments, or my knee, if we have the proper support, then we might be done. If not, then we might carry that on for years, decades, or even to our death. So if I were to talk about this a little bit scientifically, then I've drawn you guys a picture. This is what suffering might look like. It's not scientific, you guys. There's scientific evidence, but I need pictures to make this make sense for me. So we all look at life and go, see, this is reality. This is life. These are facts. And if it meets my expectations and if all is well, then I'm going to be, it's fine. But the way that suffering occurs is that I'm going to point to my life and then tell you how far it is from the expectation I had of it. So I, my mom should have just kept me and raised me, which is different than my reality, which is I grew up as an adoptee. You have that separation. And in that separation, not always, but it's only within that separation that I can create suffering. And it might sound like this: why me? Why was I given away? Look at all of these other people that get to stay with their families of origin. And here's me just flapping out there, thrown away. I tend to be a little bit hyperbolic and a little dramatic. So I might use those big, flowery, dramatic terms. Why me? Yeah, poor me. It's always me. Why? And then I'll ruminate on it daily, weekly, monthly, decades. And then if something comes up that helps me remind me of that sense of not belonging, then I might go back to blaming. See, if my mom just didn't throw me away, then I could have friends. I wouldn't have blown up my marriage. I could keep friends. There's an element of blaming him, her, them, life, job, no job, God, pandemic, yeah? Whatever the situation is, politics, war, isms. So the blame can be small or it can be all encompassing, but this is the formula that we create and carry in our mind that is suffering, the ongoing. So the event could have been so long ago, but I have to keep this alive in my mind in order for me to suffer. And then I might see echoes of that suffering or that trauma in the way that I'm actually living my life. The ongoing suffering might show up as my character or my personality, and it might be taking up a bunch of space. So some of the research around the echoes of trauma look like resisting positive change. So when something is good is happening, you might be like, can't last that long. Or I'll feel really guilty or shameful if I'm celebrating some sort of success. Or there's just a general lack of, I don't deserve to be happy. How about a need for complete control? I was not able to control so much of my life. Now I'm going to micromanage and control everything. And if I can't, I'm going to be worried about it or anxious about it. Deep sense of fear of failure, aversion to success, lack of concentration, inability to ask for help. Or I might continue that passing on of hurt, either creating trauma for myself or others, separating myself or others from a felt sense of safety, be it physical safety by fighting, emotional, spiritual safety. Or there's just this general unexplained system, and I might just point to it and go, I just feel anxious all the time, or depressed, or I just depersonalize or deny everything. Oh, my childhood was fine. Or there's this consistent anger or hostility, flashbacks or nightmares. So this is how those unexpressed, unmanaged, undealt with stories of trauma and suffering might show up. And then we might point to as, that's just me. This is how I am. This is just me. Yeah. Shows up. And then we might try to mask that by, okay, what do everybody else want me to be? I'll put on that smile. I'll try to fit in, even though I know I don't fit in. What kind of weight does that have? What's the price of walking around? Hi, I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm hanging in there. I'm all good. You? And yet underneath, I feel burnt out. I get a lot of calls recently from supervisors wanting me to come in and talk to their staff about compassion fatigue. Yeah, and overwhelm. All that happens when we repress. So the question for you is, in what ways are you coping, surviving, handling it? All the stuff that's underneath. And this is in my colleagues, past and future, present. I see a lot of this in helpers. Yeah, we're walking around with so much shame and resentment and guilt and secrets and my stories of grievances. and I can barely function. And yet here I am talking about, you know what, let me just skip over my healing. How can I help you? How can I support you? I'm here for you. And then I'll actually give people the advice that I need. You know what? You shouldn't handle this by yourself. Go out and get help. Let others help you. Let me help you. And yet we're really intuitive humans, especially kids. Yeah. And they can feel that sense of do as I say and not as I do. Yeah. So we continue to pass this on to one another. Maybe you're recognizing yourself. Maybe you're recognizing the folks that were there as your supporters, your parents, maybe, yeah, your significant others, your children. Yeah. This is many of us. So all of that, there was a time when I was like, okay, I know the stuff, I know the things, so let me start teaching the things. And then I had this moment of reckoning. Many of you guys have heard this. I was sitting at IVAT listening to Dr. Azim Kamiza talking about his forgiveness story and his ability to forgive the boy who murdered his son. And that in that instant, he was able to forgive and let go. And then he talked about his mindfulness practice and his ability to forgive. And I just sat there because I was talking about forgiveness and I was really teaching mindfulness to youth, knowing that I was just kind of, full of crap. So in that moment, I really sat there going, God, like, how do I really access this? What does this really mean? I do believe that it was a lot of my mindfulness teaching and the conversations that I've had and some of the intermittent practices that I had that even gave me the ability to sit in that moment and really look within to even ask that question. So even though I was kind of pseudo doing it, that is what allowed me to really step in. So then, luckily, through all of the things and all of the great works actually from Merton Chinnan, some of you guys really know Merton, yeah, recently retired. It's really through him and his guidance that I found Dr. Fred Luskin and this forgiveness process, because my brain can't handle just let go, just choose to feel better. Like, I don't know what that means. I need steps. Tell me what to do. I'm a do person. Tell me what to do. And these steps really gave me something to hold on to and to chew on and practice and play with. And so we're going to be talking about the first 3 steps here. So the grievance story, the 4 metrics of grief, and revenge fantasies. This is the segment that I think gets overlooked way too often, which is why I'm dedicating this day to it. The importance of being heard. This is the step that was missing for me. The importance of being heard, especially in this helping field. Like, what would I look like breaking down, telling people my sad stories when I'm here trying to help other people? Yeah, I was really worried about how that would look. Because the qualities of a grievance stories are not so glamorous, because it's a narrative about how we were hurt. And when you have the strong person persona, it's really tough to be vulnerable around how we were hurt. And there's a level of repetition and rumination in this narrative. So even if I'm not saying out loud, then when I go to sleep, I might not be able to sleep because there it is again. There it is again. There it is again. And everything in my life is pointing to how there it is again. It is a connection to the person who hurt us, either our villains or our failed protectors. So this story makes me feel powerless every time it comes up. It's tough to feel powerless when you're trying to be so strong, when you're trying to hold it together for your family or for your department or for your staff. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it makes sense in the same way why I didn't take care of my knee. How could I take time for that? I have other things to take care of. But when we hear it in others, you can kind of, oh, here she comes again, talking about the same thing again and again. Or it's a different person, but they did the same thing to you. There's this kind of quality that we can recognize it pretty quick in another person, this rumination. And mine was always, God, my mom threw me away and then gave me to people who didn't even want me. Yeah. And I'll have many, many stories of how I know that they didn't want me. It was their white savior mentality that wanted to adopt this brown kid. And I can point to, I worked so hard never to speak Korean again. I worked so hard to perfect my English. And yet I remember stories of my folks kind of using me as a joke, laughter. They would tell me one word in particular. Say the word toast, say the word toast. Because I would put an S to it because English is dumb, you guys. So I would say toasts because toast, plural, should be with an S, like every other plural. But to them, it was so funny. But to me, it just shrunk me. I'm working so hard. What are they laughing at? So much of the nuance I didn't get because English was still my second language. I can point to that. I can point to, and when they finally had it with me, instead of helping me feel better, they locked me up in a psych ward when I was a teenager. That's how I know that they didn't want me or love me or know how to handle me. They locked me up for about a month with people who try to kill their mothers, where I had to have every inch of me monitored. I'll point to that. I'll point to all the ways that they never came and supported me when I had kids. I have decades worth of stories how I know that these people that supposedly love me never really love me. Oh, it's so exhausting. So exhausting. And then the people who are having to listen, it's like they get the residual of this big, messy story. Where does one begin? Where does another end? How do you manage this kind of mess? The answer is you can't really manage this mess, but it is important to be heard. It's important to be heard. But some of the frustration is because I'm not quite sure what the point of my story is. It's just that I'm upset and I just want people to hear me. But it's difficult because when people are listening to those big, messy stories, everybody's automated to their internal dialogue, and there's very specific language around adoption. And it's really pro-adoptive family. It's pro-resource families. Those of you guys who are working with foster and resource families. It's very pro them. Kids really get poo-pooed. So you guys know, what do we get told as adoptees and as foster youth? Count your blessing. You're so lucky. You're so lucky. So I couldn't even start telling my story. They wanted to talk about all the other kids who didn't get adopted, right? All the kids who had it worse than me. Oh, at least your kid parents don't abuse you, right? So they wanted to tell me something. So I never really got my story out. It's always filtered through people's own experiences and beliefs. And if you really think that adoptive families can do no wrong, right, then what do I as an adoptee have to say about that? So even before I got that messy dog out of my mouth, people were jumping in, telling me how my story was wrong, right? Telling me how I should change the thinking or change that thinking. That's the doing. Yeah, so many of us want to get right into how do we solve this thing? How do we get JoYi to shut up and appreciate her life? It's hard to shut up and appreciate your life if you don't get heard. And then because of my nature, I kind of get aggressive and I get hostile. Yeah, so I'm going to say it louder or shut down. Those were my two go-tos. I'm going to swing to the one end or to the other. So my whole life, I'm sitting here trying to be heard or just shutting down. Screw it. Let me just do it all myself. And then I would get hostile again and then shut down. And so because I'm swinging from the one end to the other, there was really no time to grieve the loss. People wanted me to just count my blessings. And I'm thinking, man, I mean, as an adult now, I would have never known then. I lost my mother. I lost my country. I lost my culture. I lost my food. I lost even the racist kids who used to throw rocks at my face. At least it's something I knew. I lost all of that. Life gives us never-ending series of losses. Wars, adoption, but little things too. You know, your childhood, the loss of a friend, loss of a hope or a dream. Yeah, everyone, everything, every one of those things that have lost to us, it will be lost to us eventually unless we die first. Yeah, that's just the nature of living, is that there's going to be loss. And along with our growths, our loves, and our accomplishments, These losses go hand in hand with loving and with living. And our attempt to cope with this is what we call grief. So, what's your relationship to grief been like? What is your relationship to grief? How do you feel when others are grieving? For me, that was not even a language. It was just not a thing. I did not spend any time grieving. And boy, knowing that I had to take all that time felt really super inconvenient. But it is through kind of excavating and having this relationship to grief that then allowed me to have some sort of clarity around my story. So if we have really gone in to this grieving process, and it's not linear, as many of us know now, right? It's not linear. So grief can be messy and it can come and go, and there's many steps. Maybe some of them are happening at the same time. Maybe you're distant. It's not linear and it's not pretty. But if we have really leaned into the grieving process, then we might look for the 4 metrics of grief. And what we're really looking for is there some sort of clarity? Because if you had asked me before, like JoYi, what's wrong with you? What's your problem? I would have been like, everything is wrong. Whereas now I can say a little bit more about what happened. Yeah, I lost my mom and I really wanted a mom. And then if I couldn't have my mom, I really wanted people who wanted me, who like made me feel loved and cared for and safe. And I didn't get that. Yeah, so what happened? What specifically hurt you? And then how did you respond? Well, I didn't respond very well. I was a mess. And then how do you feel about what happened to you? Well, I'm sad. Sad. Yeah, hurt. So if we have leaned into that grieving process and we allow one another to grieve, then there's some clarity that can come out of that. And that clarity is that bite-sized bite. So instead of trying to manage all of this, maybe we can just take that one noodle, that one little piece, and that is manageable. And then we can kind of lean into this next step of revenge fantasies, this idea of we are not all saints and we are not all bad. In all of us, or maybe most of us, there is this combination of both and. And this idea of revenge fantasies, of turning the tables on our offender, this is really about trying to get in touch with our sense of power. Because when we are grieving, when we have lost, that's not a powerful position to be in. Yeah, it's a powerlessness. We've already used that word. It's a sense of powerlessness. So there's something in our brain that happens that makes us want to kind of regain the sense of power so that we can move on, Yeah, that's the interesting thing about revenge fantasies. It gives us a sense of power. So if I go, you know what? I wish my adoptive parents were, boom, put in the middle of nowhere by themselves, where they had to communicate in another language and no one was there to help them. In fact, people were just heckling them all the time. I wonder how they would feel, huh? Yeah, that. Now, I don't wish that for people. There's far too many of us that are going through that already. But there are moments when I feel powerless, when I think about trying to struggle to learn English and I see their faces in my mind laughing at me, then I do go, I wonder, I would be laughing at them. See how they feel, see how they like it. Yeah. So this revenge fantasies is about kind of righting that wrong and righting that ship so that then I can move on. But if I stay here, just like if I stay in grievance story, that rumination, or if I stay in grief, and we know people who are stuck in all these stages, then that too will keep us cemented to our villains or our failed protectors. So it's important to touch and to feel and then to let go and then to move on so that it's grip. Yeah, so we're not living at the mercy of our past, so that we can authentically be here rooted in this present moment with a view of the future and what that might look like. So this revenge fantasy is really about, are you okay with knowing that you are both good and that you have some rotten thoughts in there. But letting that rotten thought in your mind just fester is not going to do us any good. What if we just let it out? Yeah. What if we let it out? How would that feel? Felt better for me to know that I didn't have to sit there and go have these thoughts by myself, that it was pretty normal. That when I start to share mine, other people are like, oh yeah, me too. I have those thoughts too. Then I can start feeling like I belong to something. Yeah, this idea that we all do this too. I often see us misusing this. I work a lot with boys of color. So wherever I am, if I'm working with high risk populations, there tend to be boys and they tend to be boys of color from that community. And again, because I have two boys here, I had a lot of teen boys in my days. Some of them lived with me. A lot of them came through our house. And so many of them, especially the boys of color here, oh, the level of revenge fantasies that I heard and that they were punished for. So it might sound like a teacher calling out a kid for not doing their homework, or talking too loud, or my son at third grade, I got a call because he wanted to do his math assignment standing at his desk because he couldn't sit. He wanted to move in third grade. So I got a call. I was like, yeah, and right? I was not that parent. Some of you teachers are gonna not love me as a parent. What they wanted me to do was talk to him and, make him behave. When they get older, now I had this lovely boy. He's still in my life. He's almost 30, so not a boy anymore. I'm so old. Okay, so this kid, he was suspended, was sent to court for terroristic threatening because he told his teacher that he was gonna bomb his house. So for me, I hear that and I go, tell me what happened. He's like, he called me out in front of everybody telling me about this and telling me about that. I was so shamed, he said. I was so shamed in front of all my friends. What was I supposed to do? So I clearly hear that as a revenge fantasy is coming out. So if I hear that, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, tell me what happened. But for others who cannot hear that, all of a sudden they're expelled, suspended, dragged to court. So important for us to really hear, because what we're communicating when we're talking about revenge fantasies is our pain, the depth of our pain. So those three sections, what's the point of all that? So if trauma is about separation from a felt sense of safety, dignity, or a sense of belonging, then when I use the word healing, it's about restoration to wholeness. It's about connection. And there are very specific ways of behaving and attitudes that either foster connection or they foster separation. And so often, if we look at that list of separation, so many of us will judge and guilt and criticize and compare and then see like, this is for your own good. It's not. It's not. Separation is separation. Separation for separation. So even the positive comparisons, yeah, JoYi, you don't have it so tough. Look, your parents at least, provided you with a home and oh, that other Korean kid, you know what they did? They didn't even allow that kid to live in the house or be in family pictures. At least even though the comparisons seem positive, they serve to separate. So I wanted you to just go inside and see how this is feeling for you as I say this out loud, because so many of us are here on the separation column. Yeah. How many times have you judged either yourself or another, or used guilt techniques or criticisms in an effort to try to get somebody to behave better, or try to connect with them, try to be their wise mentoring person? Yeah. So how often have we sat in attitudes and language of separation thinking we were connecting? It doesn't work like that. Separation is separation. Connection is connection. So now let's go over to language and attitudes of connection. So what would it mean to really be in acceptance, even within somebody's messy messy story where they're using language that doesn't feel good to you. Yeah, that seems really hyperbolic or even violent. Can we sit in acceptance and empathy? Yeah, take responsibility for our own emotions while we're listening. What would that feel like? And do you think it would make a difference? Because me telling you it makes a difference doesn't make a difference, right? It's about you actually going in and going, huh, in what ways can you see evidence of this in your life, either in your family or in your partnerships, with your staff, with your boss? Think about the people who really make you feel good, who really draw you in, and what qualities do they possess? And think about the people who you're like, I don't know why. I know they're trying to do, but I just, and just notice what column they fall in. And in attitudinal healing, yes, Arifa, right? Jerry Jampolsky talks about focus on the light. Some of us get so distracted by the words that people use, the bigness or the messiness of the story, and we're focusing on the lampshade. But inside, we're all wanting to be heard and felt and to connect and to heal. That's our light. The way we go about it depends on all of our coping mechanisms and strategies and our personalities and our culture and our religion and how we were socialized in this world. That's all of our lampshade. And sometimes we really get distracted by that. And we want to help people get a different lampshade. Our light is all very similar, if not the same. We all want to feel connected. We all want to be seen in here. That's you too. So let's focus on the light and not the lampshade. These 3 steps, there's just a lot of resistance, both within ourselves and with whomever we're in relationship with. So vulnerability, whether we're men or women, depending on, or wherever we might be on that spectrum, vulnerability isn't just designated for one or another. Yeah. The sphere of being vulnerable is pretty universal and is number one when it comes to what are the resistance specific to the Stand for Forgiveness Project and the research that they've done, right? And dare I say, Brene Brown does her whole thing is about it, right? So if you're wanting to know a little bit more on vulnerability, I invite you to go and do your research and lean in. But fear of being vulnerable, this sense of uncertainty or risk or emotional exposure, it's going to be the number one reason why we might not do that work. Yeah, it might feel like it might be more painful than what the outcome might be worth. Fear of being wrong. Like, oh gosh, the story of adoption and adoptees complaining about that, like that was wrong. It's changed a little bit now. I see a lot more nuance and dialogue around that. But boy, you guys, in 1979, that was when I was adopted. So back in the day, like you do not talk poorly about adoptive parents. That's like, that was just an absolute no-no. That was an absolute no-no. So definitely feeling wrong in complaining about that was a fact that prevented me from having any kind of voice around being an adoptee. Fear of losing power or losing more power. Fear of being special. Like if you let go of complaining about that thing, then who would you be? There are people who have been in grief groups for decades now. You've built a solid support system around that. If you let that go, then what? So it might be a question of identity, a question of family, a question of this belonging that you have now created. Fear of loss of support, fear of acknowledging that revenge fantasy, knowing that, hey, we're, our crap stinks too. Yeah. We're not all pure and holy. So what would it mean to own our own revenge fantasies? Or those of us who are really on that anger side and are okay with showcasing our revenge fantasies, what might it mean to let that go? It might feel like losing power if you let that go. If I don't have my anger, then what would I have? If I don't have this to fuel me, then what would fuel me? Then I might be just a lump on my bed. So these common resistance to forgiveness is what prevents us from either speaking up, or it makes us fearful in supporting others to really lean in that. Yeah, which is then what leads to all this toxic positivity talk and platitudes that we throw at one another. Because going through this process of really hearing and really willing to be heard is a messy job. Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. So the very first steps, I would dare say, is that we need to formally cultivate this sense of mindfulness, which is both a practice and a state of being. And that is to be present in this moment. And this moment right now is you and me together on this screen, right? To be present in time and space. So to know that it's middle of the day, Aloha Friday, for those of you guys who are here in Hawaii, in your seats, in your chair, in your home, to be really connected to right now, no matter what it is, with acceptance. And so if you love this kind of stuff, then it might be cool to accept it. But what if you were forced to be here? You're like, ugh, my boss sent me here. So what would it feel like to be present in this moment, no matter what, with acceptance? The way that we checked in at the very beginning. Yeah, to kind of notice where your body is. Notice what thoughts are coming or going. To really connect to that breath, that safety breath, the breath that's at the lowest part of your belly, about two fingers below your belly button, to really allow that to expand with your inhales and deflate with your exhales. And really allowing that exhale to be full and smooth and complete. And in a manner that's non-striving. That we're not doing this to be better people. We're not doing this so that I can fill in the blank. It's just to be right here. And we can cultivate this. This is a practice. We can cultivate that through practice. And the research says that at about 20 minutes after 8 weeks of consistent practice, we'll be able to see some difference in your brain scans. Some of that is gray matter growing in your prefrontal cortex, your amygdala shrinking a little bit. That link between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex is decreased a little bit. So even if you get triggered, that you can take that moment to respond instead of react. But the magic is in the practice. I mean, I tried for decades just talking about it and it did not work. It was only when I actually sat my butt down and just sat there. A lot of us have a lot of good ways of thinking about only the things that we want to think about, right? But your brain is thinking about 60, maybe 70, 80,000 thoughts in a day. And they tend to be about 80% negative and about 90% repetitive. Oh, man. And for me, I was really focused on like, how do I just kind of survive? So these old stories, they were kind of playing in like a low record in the background, kind of informing me of all the dangers in my life, but I wasn't paying attention. So when I sat longer, I was really surprised at all the grief that came. But if it didn't come, then I wouldn't, I couldn't do anything with it. But I was surprised at all of the grief that came. And then I just sat there with it. But you don't have to do it on your own. There's just so many apps, so many videos, so many teachers, so many great educators and books that you can learn about it. But none of those will be as good as you sitting down for 1 minute starting today, working your way up to 3 minutes. But above all else, if you sit for 3 minutes and you're like, after 30 seconds, oh my God, I'm over it, then be over it. Right? Above all else, self-compassion and kindness. So these are the 3 that I would recommend. You start with mindfulness of breath. If you're working with little ones or teens, body scan is a good one to practice at the beginning. Working your way through some gratitude, loving kindness. And if you're working with Dr. Fred Luskin, he'll talk about PERT, positive emotional refocusing technique. So wherever you start there. Here's some apps that are really helpful. UCLA Mindful app, it's all free and there's some educational pieces. So they'll actually talk to you about how to do mindfulness in an app form. So you guys can download it actually right now. So if you're like multitasking, you could download this right now. Oak is my personal favorite. I know some people love Insight Timer. So lots of ways to cultivate mindfulness, but this is where we start. So when I'm working with these teens, and every year they would throw some sort of curriculum of the hour, curriculum of the year, use this. This is the one that's going to save everybody, right? They would throw that at me, and then I would have to go through curriculum training and then execute this curriculum. But more and more I saw that it doesn't matter the curriculum. If the kids are not like settled and if they're not calm, it's like taking a priceless pearl, that curriculum, that millions of dollars were spent, tons of people spent to make sure all of the research pieces fit perfectly together. It's like taking that priceless pearl and whipping it into a storm. Pointless, pointless. It's better to figure out how to calm that storm. So you can see where that priceless pearl falls. So that's with anything. So maybe you're like, forgiveness is not my thing. I like so-and-so's work. Great. But first, figure out what stillness and calm looks like for you. That to me is about me being willing to listen to myself. Me being willing to listen to myself, to be heard by me first, before I would expect you to hear me, before I expect my community, my teachers, whoever else. So this mindfulness is about first me allowing me to hear me. So what might that look like? Maybe you already have a practice. Maybe you had a practice and you've fallen off. That's okay. We just start where we are right now without judgment. Right now. And then we can do these other things like, how do you find more peace, joy, happiness? Yeah, I think it's always helpful to kind of break down what does that mean to you instead of parroting what somebody else says is good for you. So if I say, yeah, I'd like to be a little bit more happy, it's helpful for me to go, okay, so happiness is about my intention to pay attention to the things that make me happy, specifically then paying attention to those things, and then managing and spending time and my resource and energy around my connection to the people in my life and to my purpose. And then my ability to savor this moment no matter what. Yeah, that savoring. When's the last time you ate that food that you really loved? Do you remember what you did when you ate that piece of food that you really loved? Savoring. That, your ability to savor this moment. This is the combination of the stuff that happiness is made of. I love that breakdown. And I first heard it from Fred. Yeah, and maybe you guys were there with me when we heard it from Fred. And I was like, oh my God, that makes so much more sense to me. Because these other things about be 10% happier, just be happy. I'm like, what does that mean? Again, I need steps. I'm a do person. So I can have the intention. Whereas when I didn't feel heard and all of those big grievance stories were running around in my mind, I didn't even know that I had the option. The same way that I'm going to ask you right now. So I'm going to count to 5. And some of you guys have done this with me again and again and again. I'm going to count to 5. In those 5 minutes, I need you to look around your room and count everything that is yellow. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So how many purple things did you count? And those of you who were with me and you knew I was going to switch up the colors, did you count any color because you were so worried about what color I was going to actually say? Yeah, brains can get filled with all kinds of things. But I think what's important to know is whether you're counting it or not, yellow things are probably in your room. Purple things are probably in your room. Green things, blue things, black things, white things, all the things are probably in your room. We all have access to a lot of stuff, but if we're hyper-focused on pain and averting pain, then that tends to be all we see. So your intention to see something different matters so that then you can pay attention to that. So that is the very first step. But if you have the intention now to be heard, how do you do that? How do you do that? You might want some support, right? So finding a therapist or a counselor, a trusted friend, or a combination of those things to really feel heard might be an appropriate step. Maybe you're down for reading a book first. There's some books here. There's lots of YouTube videos here. There's lots of research around journaling and getting that out onto paper so that it's concrete, so that you can do something with that. Maybe you'll want to start there. Yeah, so if you have the intention to, there are a lot of resources that can support you in the doing. So like this video and then other series that we make either with our facilitators. So if you're a mindful forgiveness facilitator, will you put that in the comments below right now so that the rest of us can find you? I don't have a group going on right now, but in those places, you guys are welcome to grab a screenshot because I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your presence here. I really appreciate that. Because ultimately, if we can all be at peace within ourselves, if we can be at peace, then we can create peace in our homes. And that's what peace on earth is. I know that gets a little woohoo, right? But we so much focus on the thing out there, but it starts here. You are the universe. But it can feel like, oh God, overwhelming. So I encourage you to get into a group, start talking about this, start practicing that thing. If you are working with staff and clients, think about all of the ways that we ask people to be vulnerable and share their stories all the time. And if you're not willing to do that, there's something that's amiss. So right now, I don't have any groups going on, and I know Susan has 2 that's full already, but there's other facilitators. If you like this process and you like the steps, then I invite you to join a group. Get in there, feel your feels, talk the talk, and help people, allow others to help you really start to excavate these stories that you might be carrying around. Maybe it just happened last year, but I dare say there's a lot of us that have been carrying around for a long time. So that is the first step, to be heard. And then if you're on the other end, so for us facilitators, our job is to stop giving too much advice, right? Stop interjecting. Our job when we're there with you is to really be present, to take care of ourselves, take emotional responsibility for ourselves, and let you process your story, because you are the person that knows the most. So what would it mean? How would it feel to share your story? And what does it mean? And how would it feel the next time somebody is sharing their story, no matter how messy, no matter how much it doesn't make sense and how much it's going around in circles? How would it feel for you to be present in that moment, to really hear? And above all else, practice. So whatever you heard here today, if it served you well, take that with you. And your job is to practice, because that's where the magic is. So download that app, watch that video, grab that book, grab that person, and practice. And whatever you heard, you're like, no, that's not for me, or not right now. That's okay too. Then you leave it behind, because discernment, it's your life. It's your job to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Even if all the research says this is the thing, won't matter. If it doesn't connect with you in your brain, your heart brain, and your gut brain, then it doesn't matter. Yeah. So take with you that which serves you well, and you practice. Leave behind anything that doesn't serve you well. So to conclude our time, we'll do it the same way that we started, which is, how was it to hear my story, or pieces of my story? Where did that connect for you? And can you let that go? Notice what your room looks like, feels like, smells like, what your body's doing. Maybe wiggle around and find balance where you're sitting. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and lower your gaze or close your eyes. And just really sink into that feeling of stillness, that quiet, as you start to deepen your breath, the breath that allows your stomach to inflate with your inhale and deflate with your exhale. And I'll invite the chime to ring to signal the end of our time together. Thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead and continue to breathe as you listen for the chime to dissipate. And if there were questions here, I will take note of them and respond in the video comments on the Practice Center's YouTube page. So thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Aloha Friday, everyone. I hope you have a lovely, lovely weekend planned. And I hope to see you at the end of the month next month. And also we have attitudinal healing stuff coming up too. So look for that on the website and all the places. And thank you, Susan Oka, for always putting this together and sending out all the links so you guys can get here. So please send her some love too. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to look at the comments to see if there's questions that I need to take note of. Aloha. Thank you.